Very good, very good. Good morning. I gather we're starting late, and so I'm going to be on 45 as opposed to 33 as I do my introductory remarks in deference to the panel and all of you. We're starting late, but because of the speaker's presence on the program at the lunch hour, we don't have any flexibility on the back end. I know, hearing over a shorter period of time from journalists is going to break your heart. Somehow you'll get over it. But let's use the time we have wisely and try to get into some good discussion here about what's happening in the next session from our perspective. I'm Evan Smith. I'm the CEO and editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Generally speaking, I do whatever Steve Murdoch tells me to do, which is why I drove in from Austin today to convene this conversation with my fellow Capitol journalists about the session. We are a man down, as you may notice. Paul Burka is late in arriving. He will be here soon. I was going to say that we sent him to Dallas last night to find civility in the U.S. Senate debate, and he's still looking. That's why he's not here. But unfortunately, the excuse is something a little bit more workaday that he's not here, but he will be here shortly. But I am very fortunate to be joined by two people I admire greatly. In what is a shrinking group of Capitol reporters, they really do rise to the top of that list. On my immediate right is Kate Alexander. Kate has been a reporter for the Austin American-Statesman since 2002. She covers the Texas Legislature for the paper with a focus on the state budget, education, and pensions. And Billy, she was taking careful notes during the last program, I promise you. She is a native of Lake Stevens, Washington. She has an undergraduate degree from Cornell University in Communications and a graduate degree in journalism from the University of Maryland, College Park. To her right is my old friend Joe Hawley, politics editor of the Houston Chronicle. He's been on staff there since 2009. Previously, he was a staff writer at the Washington Post, and he's written over the years for a number of newspapers and magazines. When I was editor of Texas Monthly, I often got an opportunity to publish Joe's work, and I was very pleased to do that. He's a native of Waco. He has an undergraduate degree from Abilene Christian University and master's degrees in English from UT Austin and journalism from Columbia University. If you're a sports fan, you may know that just this last week, his book about Sammy Baugh, Slingin' Sam, The Life and Times of the Greatest Quarterback Ever to Play the Game, was published. Please join me in welcoming Kate and Joe. And in his absence, Paul will keep the chair empty for him when he arrives. He'll slide right in. Obviously, Kate and Joe, we are a couple weeks away from a consequential election. Every election is always the most important election of our lifetimes. This one may actually be, both in the state, at the state level and nationally. We know a lot already from the primaries and the runoffs, and I think we know enough about what's coming on November 6th that I can pose this question reasonably. What are the takeaways from this election cycle as they relate specifically to the session? What have you learned, and what should we be thinking about based on these election results going into the session? Kate first, and then Joe.
Well, I think in terms of the makeup of the legislature, we have lost an incredible amount of institutional knowledge, both on the House and the Senate side. On the Senate side, for instance, Senate Finance Chairman Steve Ogden, Senate Education Chair Florence Shapiro have both retired, and so there is a fair amount of shifting going on within the Senate. So right now we are waiting to see. The main thing we're waiting to see is who Lieutenant Governor appoints as the education chair. That is going to be a major indicator of what direction he wants to go in the future.
You don't think it's a foregone conclusion, Kate, as some believe that Dan Patrick will be the chair of public education?
I do not.
Explain why, because I may be in the foregone conclusion camp. Disabuse me of that idea.
There was an awful lot of chatter that it was a done deal, that Senator Patrick was going to be education chair. The other person in the running was Senator Seliger. And they represent, to some extent, different wings of the Republican Party. It seemed like the momentum was behind Senator Patrick for a good period. In the wake of the appointment of Commissioner Williams as the TEA commissioner, the chatter shifted a bit. And so we really expected that appointment right after Labor Day, and we still haven't seen it. So there is a sense that Dewhurst is really struggling with this decision. And I heard yesterday that there might be someone else. Senator Dewell is also in the running at this point. So we shall see. And that decision is really going to dictate a lot of about the issues that we see rise to the top during the legislative session. I mean, I think education is going to be one of the prevailing issues next session.
Yeah. Joe, Kate makes a good point. The departures of a lot of key people on both the House and Senate side really will make things different in the next session. I believe by one estimate I've heard, half of the House next session will be first or second term members. It takes until the second term to find the bathrooms in that building.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And on the Senate side, the departures will, people who are departing will be replaced in almost every instance by people not just more conservative, but significantly more conservative than them. And so the character of the Senate may also change as a consequence of this.
Let me back up a little bit, Evan, because I drove in from Dallas this morning at 2:30, and I'm still marveling over what I saw and heard. How many of you saw the debate last night? Was it carried in?
You had to watch C-SPAN if you were outside of
Dallas.
Yeah,
you need to watch it, because you would see a combative, irascible Texas Democrat in the name of Paul Sadler put Ted Cruz on the defensive, which is unusual. And I'm not sure that either Sadler or Cruz helped themselves all that much last night, but it was surprising. And it's a reminder that yet again, Texas Democrats are in a hole. And what you were saying about the makeup of the legislature this time reminds me of what Dan Patrick said to me not too long ago, and that is that he's so excited because we have a chance to finish what we started this time, because he's got the troops and the Democrats can't do much about it.
Right. The Democrats' numbers are right now it's 102-48 in the House. It's 19-12 in the Senate. Kate, we think that the Senate is going to be either 1912 or 2011, right, depending upon the outcome of the Wendy Davis race in Tarrant County, which is the only competitive race on the Senate side. But on the House side, we really don't know what the numbers are going to be. We assume they'll be lower than 102. Do you think that it's possible that the Democrats will pick up 10 seats, 5 seats? What's your best guess at this point, looking at the map on the House side?
What are we now?
We're now at 102-48.
I mean, I think the expectation is they're going to pick up, 10, 15 seats, something like to that extent, is it not?
Well, that feels like a little high, but
yeah.
They'll pick up some in any case. And it may not be a supermajority, but the fact is the Republicans will still be firmly in control of both the House and the Senate. So to Dan Patrick's point to Joe, it's reasonable to think that the Republicans, as they had free reign to do what they wanted in the last session, essentially unimpeded by the Democrats, are likely to have the same power this session.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
You would say?
And it's also interesting that these are, to my way of thinking, doctrinaire Republicans who are coming in with an agenda, and it'll be interesting to see how much what happened last session influences what they're trying to get done this session.
Doesn't everybody come in, though, in fairness to those Republicans, Democrats and Republicans both, everybody comes in theory with an agenda, otherwise why run?
Yeah, that's right? True.
Yeah.
But it's a particular, I'm not sure how to describe it other than doctrinaire approach to governing.
Right. Kate, on the question of the House, and again, come back to the numbers on the House and what the composition of the House is likely to be. You have in some cases a bunch of conservatives who were elected to open seats or to seats that are in play, but you also have some so-called parent PAC or pro-education Republicans. I think it may be a misnomer, but the idea is what we used to call moderates before moderate became a four-letter word. So the composition of the new members will not just be entirely one side ideologically.
That's true, and we also see the House Public Education Committee. I believe 5 of the 9 members are gone, including the public education chairman. So we are going to see an enormous change on that committee, and it will really be up to Speaker Strauss, assuming he's Speaker, and I don't get a sense that is going to change. It'll really be up to Speaker Strauss to sort of dictate the who is on that public ed committee and the tenor that the House takes. I mean, if we have Senator Patrick as education chairman, it would be left to the House to sort of moderate education policy. So. And
in Rob Eisler of the Woodlands and Scott Hochberg of Houston, both departing, chair and vice chair of public education, in their absence, who is likely to be the chair of public education? We hear a lot more about what might happen on the Senate side, but what are you hearing about the House side?
Either Jimmy Donaycock or Dan Huberty.
Okay.
Dan Huberty from Houston, who is a former school board member.
Has experience on the school board side on public ed, right. Kate, you mentioned public education is likely to be one of the big prevailing issues during the session. Obviously, the cut last session was one of the big headlines coming out of the session, and depending upon your perspective on this, you call it a $4 billion cut, or you call it a $5.4 billion cut, but either way, it's a historic cut relative to what we've seen in the past. It's hard to imagine a scenario this session where public ed is not in the crosshairs again in one form or another. Isn't that right? Given the fact that we're not likely to have a whole lot of money to spend on replacing, the last panel notwithstanding, on replacing some of the money that came out of the budget last time.
I don't think that I don't think that the legislature will end up replacing the $4 billion that was cut out of the foundation school program. I do think that there will be a little movement perhaps on some of the $1.4 billion in grant programs, such as the Student Success Initiative and pre-K, for instance. A lot of those programs are quite popular, and so there might be some movement on that front. I don't think public ed is going to be cut again. I think that they will end up, they will fully fund enrollment growth, but I don't see, as the last panel was indicating, given the uncertainty of the with the school finance litigation, I don't see them putting a significant amount of new money in.
Joe, you know, hearing Kate say, Joe, that they're not going to cut public education again is probably cause for optimism in some public ed circles, as I think a lot of people in public ed assume, given the way the unrestricted portion of the budget is constituted, that would be a logical place to go for cuts if cuts are necessary.
Certainly, but I think they realize that they just can't do it. We were talking, Kate and I were talking about the parent PAC organization, who takes credit for having influence on 11 races during the primaries, Republican and Democrat, based on education issues. And it's an example to me of lawmakers coming to Austin and owning this issue that received so much attention the last time.
Right.
You know, they've got to come to terms with it. And people like Huberty and Dan Branch, both Republicans, both reasonable, knowledgeable, now experienced. Huberty is one term, now second term. I mean, I think they'll take it seriously.
Right. Kate, are you assuming going into this session that we're going to have a shortfall to contend with? I know, again, Billy's panel discussed this to some degree. What's your perspective on this?
Well, I think we are going to go in, we are actually going to have a significant surplus for the current biennium, for the 12-13 biennium. I mean, there are some projections that we could have a record surplus in terms of $8 billion, $9 billion.
So you're confident from a budget standpoint, given what we heard about sales tax collections being up and the economy being on the rebound and all that?
At this point, at the end of fiscal year 12, which ended at ended in the end of August,
right,
we had $5.3 billion more than we had when the comptroller certified the budget at the end of the legislative session.
Right.
So, and that is just 1 year in a 2-year budget. Granted, we might not see the same level of growth, but that is certainly a very strong base on which to build. And
the prospect of having to replace, or to pay, I should say, bills that we knew were due in the last session, but that we kicked into this session, the Medicaid, for instance, the whatever the estimate is, $4 to $5 billion, that is not a cause for alarm when you view the surplus as you just described it.
Right.
You think we're going to have the money to make those obligations?
And I mean, the expectation is that we'll have the money to cover the Medicaid shortfall, as well as pay back the deferral and some of the other accounting mechanisms that were used to certify the budget last time.
Joe, what's your expectation in terms of the surplus? How much of a surplus are we likely to have? And do you think going into this session that we're likely to be more optimistic about our prospects for spending money than we were last time?
It may not be cause for alarm for most of us. It may be for the distinguished state representative who just walked in and who studies these things, Mike Villarreal. I think there's reason for optimism, but I'm not sure of the amount. But I think there's reason for optimism about what we have to work with.
If I might add,
please.
Even though we will have a surplus, you heard from the last panel that there was a very strong movement toward constraining spending, both in terms of creating a stronger spending cap and in dealing with the diversion of dedicated funds. And so there's going to be there are going to be a number of efforts to sort of find ways to constrain spending, whether we have money, additional money or not.
From the governor, of course, too.
Right, I want to talk about the governor and the budget compact in a second, but let me ask you first about the franchise tax, which was much discussed in the last session. Senator Ogden, who I would describe, I think, fairly as no one's idea of a liberal, was among those who talked about the need to possibly tweak the margins tax, that it was not producing in the way that we had been told it would. And the theory of a structural deficit emerges from what we saw, at least in the last session. Are we expecting such a structural deficit to result from the franchise tax in this session, or have things turned around to the point that maybe it will begin to perform it the way we were told it would?
Well, it's certainly not going to perform as it was expected in 2006. Nowhere close. It's doing better than it was before. It very strongly reflects the economy, but it's never going to meet the expectations of 2006.
So is it possible that what the franchise tax is not going to produce will offset some of the good news that you described earlier?
Sure.
And it's not going to change. I mean, Ogden was bemoaning that last session and couldn't get anything done.
The governor was
He's
opposed.
gone.
The governor, I believe, was opposed when Ogden said he wanted to change the franchise tax to some degree. I believe both the governor and Chairman Pitts on the House side were both not in favor of that.
And I think there will be some movement to reform the franchise tax, but it'll be it will end up being revenue neutral. They're not going to change it so that it raises additional money. They'll make some fixes so that it's fairer,
Right.
and we'll put in place we'll make the small business exemption permanent.
But won't produce a windfall of any kind that can be used.
No.
In the next session. To the point of the governor, I thought that the governor's representative on the last panel did a very good job of explaining the budget compact and his intentions for it, his aspirations for it in great detail. It sounds to me like the governor's perspective, which will have a big impact on the session, is not just that we don't have enough revenue. His point is that we have too much spending. And so he's looking to make certain that going into the next session, the legislature appreciates the importance of not just raising taxes, but not raising existing taxes, not just new taxes, but no increases on existing taxes, no fees. It sounds like it's going to be a session without new revenues. It's going to be focused entirely on spending. Joe, is that your impression?
That's my impression. Of course, they're all kind of speculation about the governor's plans and how these emphases have an effect on what he intends to do.
You think that the governor's intentions for the budget compact are tied to his own political future?
I wouldn't be surprised.
But what's inconsistent? But what would you say would be inconsistent about what the governor has said most recently versus what he said previously? It feels like actually he's just codified what he's been saying informally for the last couple of sessions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
But you think there's politics in that previously and now?
Yes, I do.
You do. Kate?
Well, we look at how the
You want to help him out of that hole, or what do you want to do? You throw him a line? Go ahead.
I think you can look at last session and how the governor dealt with the rainy day fund as very instructive. He essentially redefined how the rainy day fund was to be used. I mean, when it was created in '87, it's officially called the Economic Stabilization Fund. It's intended to help the state sort of bridge through economic cycles. But the governor completely redefined how that money was supposed to be used, and he was incredibly successful. I think he will have a similar level of success in sort of defining how the legislature should go about budgeting.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing. And his political ambitions and how they play out. That's just Austin life.
Yeah, Kate, the argument last session was that if it's not raining now, when will it be raining? Mm-hmm. If we're going to cut money from public education, if we're going to cut financial aid from higher ed, if we're going to do the budget cuts that we did across the board in the last session, you'd think that would be exactly the moment to dip into the rainy day fund. It's raining.
Right.
But he was able to make the persuade people that the argument that should be made was that we don't touch this in case we have a real crisis.
Well, and coming out of 2010 with the Tea Party surge, it was an argument that there were a lot of receptive ears for in the legislature for that argument. So the mood has changed a little bit, but I don't think that there is going to be. I can see the rainy day fund, and Mike acknowledged this. I can see the rainy day fund being used next session for some one-time expenses, clear one-time expenses, like some water plan, for instance. But I don't see it being used to restore education cuts or any. They are going to be very protective of that rainy day fund.
Well, in fact, what I thought I heard Mike say was that relative to the plan last time to kick some of the Medicaid costs down the road and to delay the payment on the schools, that he thought that the governor would be advocating not doing that again, that actually his point with the budget compact was to say those so-called accounting tricks are going to come to an end with this session. Is that not the impression you have?
No, yes.
Yeah.
But they will have the additional revenue, the surplus revenue in the 12-13 budget to
Right.
pay for that Medicaid and pay for to undo some of those accounting tricks. So they'll have a clean slate going into 14-15.
And then won't do this, won't do that kind of can kicking again.
So,
Perhaps.
Kate,
Yeah.
Kate, you were saying the mood has changed because of the economy or because of pent-up needs or what?
Well, and the politics. I mean, we don't.
Politics.
As you mentioned with the parent PAC folks, and I mean they're not the members coming in are not as strident as those. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I think that. As Ross wrote recently, that members have been hearing an awful lot from their constituents about the impact of budget cuts, particularly on education, and so there will be some softening on that front.
To your point about politics, Joe, I was going to go there later, but I'll go there now. To what degree is the governor going to be a dominant figure during this session, and how much of that will be driven by his intentions for himself, pardon me, past the 2013 session?
Well, I suspect he'll be a dominant figure
Yeah.
because of the power that he has amassed over this long period of time. But I also think there's pent-up pressure underneath, restless potential governors and lieutenant governors. That's a factor that's going to come into play this session.
It's been a long time since we had change at the top. You think that the people beneath the governor and lieutenant governor are finally ready for there to be some
They're getting
change?
restless. They're seeing time passing, and they can't do anything until
Right.
the governor gets out of the way.
Kate, what about the lieutenant governor's position? I think we all can agree that the governor, as he has been, will be dominant in this session in one form or another, whether it's through the budget compact or whatever else he does. Lieutenant governor was effectively reelected during the Senate race, was he not? I guess that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is that his soft political underbelly was exposed in this primary. And he goes into this session having been rejected by the voters of Texas for the Senate race. And I wonder to what degree that dynamic will bear on his leadership in the Senate. Would you comment on that?
Sure. For one, I think he's mortally wounded politically. Even though he has said he is going to run again in 2014, I think he looks very, very vulnerable.
Do you disbelieve him when he says that?
No.
So you think he is going to run again?
No, I don't think he is.
So you do disbelieve him?
I do disbelieve him.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
I think he was. I think he was trying to avoid being a lame duck.
So what does this mean for his leadership of the body? The body has been somewhat unruly and not necessarily entirely behind him in lockstep previously. What's it likely to be like this time?
I think we are waiting to see this decision on Senate education as a key indicator as to how he will
Okay,
move.
so I have to let you game this out then. So if he picks Patrick, it tells you what? If he picks Seliger or Dool or some other person, it tells you what?
I think if he picks Patrick, he has a much. If he picks Patrick, he has there's going to be a significant amount of dissent within the caucus. If he picks Seliger, there is going to be a very loud Senator Patrick, and he has a growing group within the Senate of Tea Party senators who will fight Dewhurst on every turn. So that's why this sort of Senator duel has emerged as sort of a third-party candidate, in that he could be sort of splitting the baby.
Split the difference. Joe, Kate makes an interesting point. So with the addition of Hancock and Taylor and Paxton and Campbell and possibly Shelton to the Senate, the Seliger-Duncan L-type Corona wing of the Republican Party becomes the fringe.
They become the fringe. They're isolated,
right.
and it's going to be even more unruly than it was last
And so
time.
do you buy Kate's point that if he overlooks or bypasses Patrick in favor of somebody else, that he'll have a revolt on his hands from the dominant part of the caucus now? You do?
I do.
What do you think about this idea that's been floated that the lieutenant governor might do what I guess Senator Montfort will remember this, Governor Bullock did one time, and appoint chairs from only one party? I gather Governor Bullock came to regret that in the person of Ike Harris by about April that session. But that doesn't mean that Governor Dewhurst might not bow to the pressure from his right and appoint all Republican chairs. That's an active conversation. Speaker Strauss has already said to me recently, publicly, I will not appoint all Republican chairs in the House. But on the Senate side, that's been, Joe, an active topic of conversation around the Capitol.
I don't think he has that option.
Do you think he cannot do that?
I think he cannot do that, given the Dan Patricks of the body.
So you think that if he appointed all Republican chairs, it would put Dan Patrick off how? I think Dan Patrick would like him to appoint all Republican. Maybe I haven't asked the question clearly enough. I'm asking if you believe that the lieutenant governor would actively consider appointing only Republican chairs of committees, as much as that would be a breach of tradition.
Yes, I'm saying that Dewhurst will consider.
You're saying he is going to actively consider it.
Yes.
You think he'd ultimately do it?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Kate, what do you think?
I don't think so. But the fact that it is taking him so long to make these decisions, well, other than Dewhurst's legendary indecisiveness.
Yeah, with no disrespect to Lieutenant Governor, the concept of him taking longer to do something than he had intended to is not new.
But the fact that he has yet to make this decision, it indicates that he's wrestling with all of these questions.
What about the so-called stick it to Zaffarini idea that has been floated, that we've all heard much about at the Capitol, that he might consider combining public and higher ed and cutting Chairwoman Zaffarini, who's now been chairing higher education, out of the chairmanship equation? Would you dare want her on your enemies list, Kate?
No.
She'll be up at 2 in the morning every day calling you, right?
No, I wouldn't want her on my enemies list, but at the same time, she was an absolute flashpoint during the U.S. Senate primary. I mean, she was the person that the conservatives pointed to as, an indication of how Dewhurst had failed them. Because
he had given her the power to run the higher ed committee?
Yeah, and specifically because she was able to kill the in-state tuition, or the bill that would have repealed in-state tuition.
So do you think that there's an active possibility that Zaffarini gets cut out?
Yes.
You do? Joe, do you think so?
I do too, yes.
Yeah?
It'll make it exciting.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we're not really journalists. We're fight promoters. We like action. So I'm actually thrilled to hear that. That's actually pretty great.
There's several, Evan. There's Whitmire and Ellis and others who
would no more readily stand to be passed over than Senator Zaffarini would.
Right.
I guess the focus has been on her, but you're correct. If he ends up appointing all Republican chairs, it's all of them who get cut out. Let me ask you about the relative position of the Speaker. We've talked about the Lieutenant Governor. The Speaker is constantly, it seems to me these days, having to stand with his back against the wall so that he's not stabbed from behind by the people to his right and to his left. Can you assess his position in this session? Where does the Speaker come out? How strong a factor will he be in the administration of the House and in the overall legislature?
I think he has the potential to be the dominant player.
Explain.
Well, because you have so much inexperience in the House, he'll be able to drive much of that conversation with his appointments and to committee chairs. I mean, how many committee chairs in the House have left?
Yeah, I can't.
Well, and I'm aware of at least 6 consequential chairs, or chairs of consequential, significant A-list committees in the House at least have left.
So he will definitely be able to dictate the conversation within the House, and probably have more. Well, probably has more stability than Dewhurst will.
But Joe, does the Speaker not have a problem, though, in that the people to the right of him have never been satisfied with his leadership in the House, seem no more happy this time, in that they've already got one of their own. Brian Hughes from Mineola, who is challenging him for Speaker. Hughes may be a stalking horse for somebody else. Hughes may actually end up being a candidate. There may be others still to come. And on the left, you've got Trey Martinez Fisher swinging at the Speaker with both fists, it seems like, on behalf of a small but unhappy Democratic minority. Does that say to you, you have a happy situation for the Speaker?
That's what I was going to say. That's a terribly difficult situation to be in. But Strauss is a relatively reasonable guy. In this case, says he has a role to play if he can sort of carve that role.
Is there a place for reasonableness of the sort that the Speaker exemplifies in your mind in this legislature?
There is a place, but whether it's going to find its place, particularly early on.
Kate said earlier that she thinks it's a foregone conclusion that the Speaker will be the Speaker again. Do you agree?
With that.
You agree?
Yeah.
You both think so?
Yes.
No chance that there could be a revolt from the right that would overtake Speaker Strauss? You don't give Brian Hughes any chance of making that sale?
I don't.
I don't either. I mean, if you went to the the state GOP convention, and that was your only indication, then you would say absolutely that Joe Strauss is an endangered species. But when you look at the numbers within the House, assuming that the Democrats stay with Strauss, then his reelection as Speaker seems pretty certain.
Let me press you on that. First of all, and I'm going to try not to look at Mike when I say this, I'm told by Democrats in the House that the Democrats' support of the Speaker is not unconditional and is not a guarantee. That, in fact, what one Democrat has said to me is the problem with the Speaker is he treats his enemies better than he treats his friends. And that the Democrats, while they were willing to give the Speaker their votes last time, may not be so willing this time unless they're able to extract some significant concessions from him.
Well, that's probably true, but again, I'm not going to look at Mike either, but where do they go?
Yeah. Mike?
Stick around to this afternoon, right? And spoiler alert, we'll get a little spoiler from Mike now. So yes, the Democrats may have no place to park their votes, but you don't consider their 48 votes to be significant in the resolution of the Hughes versus Strauss fight. You just think it's a foregone conclusion that they end up with the Speaker regardless of what happens.
That's what I would suspect.
Right. Let me ask you now from the other side of the spectrum politically with regard to the Speaker. Freedom Works very prominently came out last week, the National Tea Party group that Dick Armey and others are in control of, and endorsed Brian Hughes in the Speaker's race. It's unusual for a National Tea Party group to get into Speaker politics in Texas, but I suppose we shouldn't be surprised by anything these days. And frankly, it was Freedom Works and other like groups that provided the rocket booster that propelled Ted Cruz past David Dewhurst, some may say, in the Senate primary. So do we think that the National Tea Party's involvement in this race changes the political calculation for the Speaker or the dynamics of that race as they will play out?
Well, Freedom Works got involved in the previous speakers.
Didn't help Ken Paxton, right?
That's
Didn't help Ken Paxton. But isn't this time different from last time? Wouldn't you say that 2012 is different from 2010 as far as the Tea Party's influence on these kinds of things goes?
I can't see that kind of influence having that much, I mean, that kind of Freedom Works involvement having that much influence within the House itself.
Right.
I mean, maybe if this were a statewide race of some sort, it might be different, but not, this is sort of intra.
I think it's important to remember that it is an election of the members, or by the members. And so that dynamic, that political dynamic is much different than looking at a statewide race.
All right, so let's assume then it's Dewhurst, Strauss, and Perry, and we've talked about public education as a big issue. Let me ask you about higher ed. The governor and his intentions for higher ed reform really took control of the conversation to a very large degree during the last session. He went off to run for president, and for 5.5 months, that conversation basically paused. And as I like to think of it, when he came back, it was like that season of Dallas where Victoria Principal realized the entire thing was a dream. So those 5.5 months ceased to exist. We picked up the conversation back on August 11th of last year as if it never had happened. So we're back to talking about higher ed reform again. And we expect that higher ed reform will be, once again, a dominant part of the conversation in the next session. Should it be? Will it be? And what does it portend?
I think the governor has signaled that he's interested in restarting that conversation with his $10,000 degree plan and various other plans that President Powers at UT seems somewhat amenable to at least discussing.
Of course, so much of the conversation, and I think Senator Monfort will appreciate this, so much of the conversation about higher ed reform translated into a conversation about UT.
That's true.
Well, last time I looked, there were 6 university systems. And yet the conversation about higher ed reform seemed to be entirely focused on not just UT, but whether Bill Powers would still have his job this fall. It's a bigger conversation, in fact, than UT, right?
Yeah, UT and then A&M to a slightly lesser degree.
Yeah. Kate, what do you think? Will it be back in play as a conversation point, and what will it portend, or what does it portend?
I think it will be part of the conversation, most definitely. I think one key thing to remember about this is that many of the policies that the governor are pushing it's intended, well, I can't speak to his intentions, but you have to look at this within the context of the budget and the appropriations sphere. He's trying to control the costs so that the state doesn't have to put more into higher education, and I think that's an undercurrent to all of this. But
this is a budget issue at the end of the day, not so much a higher ed issue.
Isn't everything?
Well, I think you could argue that, but at the same time, many of the things that the governor said in the context of this discussion last time were interpreted as not about the budget, but about the way higher ed ran itself. I don't know that I said that very elegantly, but that it was about the way higher ed executed upon its mission.
Which is true, but it needs to be a policy discussion about the contribution that the state makes to its universities and the importance of those contributions to the state itself and its future and its economic.
Do you think the message of the higher ed reform discussion last time was that it's an appropriate thing to be talking about financial efficiency and accountability for universities? Because that was, again, back to the UT question, but not just the UT question, that was one of the many flashpoints of that conversation, was the degree to which the state should be prescribing benchmarks that universities should hit on financial efficiency and accountability.
Because it works so well in public ed.
The transcript will note your sarcasm.
Yes.
Right. But Evan, it's a good discussion to have. I watched it as it played out with the University of Houston. It was painful, and the cuts were painful, and yet it forced that university, and I suspect others, to, if not explain or justify, sort of make clear what it is that a university is supposed to be doing, how they do it, and whether they could do it better.
And the governor the other day was at the University of Dallas, I believe, or UT Dallas, maybe it was, talking about the need for greater transparency on the cost side, being able to tell students as they enter public universities, if you stay in for this many years, this is the cost that you can expect to incur. Nothing wrong with transparency as a general principle.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. Water came up in the last session as well, and I would concur with the previous panelists that after the worst one-year drought in the history of the state, we're looking at a need to deal with water in some way. We have a state water plan. That's the good news. The bad news is it's $53 billion, as I understand it, totally unfunded. And there's the added question of whether we have the right plan. The plan is basically a plan that thinks we're going to engineer our way out of the crisis, when a lot of people think that we don't need new reservoirs. We need new desalination plants, that it's actually technology as opposed to engineering that will get us there. What is your satellite view of this issue and the degree to which, given the budget constraints we have, we can do anything on it in the next session?
Well, that's one of those looking ahead issues that requires some forethought, some discussion, and I'm not sure that's going to happen this time.
Kate, are we in a looking ahead mood, or in a spending money to save money down the road kind of mood from what you can see?
I don't get the sense that we are in a looking ahead mood. I mean, I think you have leadership who are both sort of stuck, and I mean, until you get sort of new people in, I don't think that we are going to be looking ahead. In terms of the water plan, I do think that some of that will be funded through, whether it's a good plan or not, I can't speak, but I do think that some of it will be funded through the rainy day fund.
So we're going to see some action on water next session, but we don't know that it will be, the entire bill certainly won't be paid, and it may be a first step in the path to getting there.
That's my impression.
In the end. So we got public ed, we've talked about higher ed, we didn't know about vouchers, actually. I know I was interested to hear vouchers come up in the last panel as well. Chairman Presumptive Patrick, has been talking about vouchers. Lieutenant Governor got right behind vouchers after Senator Patrick did. We know that the governor is on the record over time as being for vouchers. There's some question now as to whether the governor might even put that on the list of emergency items going into the next session. But what I'm hearing out of the House is possibly a pause. We're not really sure that the House would get behind vouchers as fully as the Senate would. What's your read on the voucher issue? What are the optics of it and the politics of it going forward right now?
Well, the important thing to realize with vouchers is that it divides the Republican caucus. Your rural Republicans, for instance, there's really no upside for them to get behind a voucher plan. In fact, there's a huge downside in that they have this idea is certainly opposed by most within the public ed establishment. So it would have the effect of alienating their superintendents, who are very important people in their communities. So there's little motivation for a rural Republican to get behind vouchers.
But Joe, to Kate's point, this is not exactly a party line vote.
It's
and
not,
on a lot of other issues, the numbers that the Republicans have run up in the House and Senate would suggest that they could pass whatever they wanted to, but not every Republican is behind this.
That's right, but also thinking about Dan Patrick, who's sort of, as a fellow Houstonian, is my touchstone for the sort of the Tea Party wing of the Republican Senate. And that's his major issue, and he's going to push it for all it's worth. And yet, the panel that preceded us, and I can't remember who they were, but they were talking about how there's a bit of exploration that's due before they push ahead the way Dan Patrick probably wants to.
Right.
The details are key.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you do about accountability? I mean, accountability is going to be a huge issue this next session with the end of course exams and so forth. We have a newly energized constituency of parents who are now paying attention.
Anti-testing parents.
And
a big block now.
They're very well organized and they're very smart, and this will be an interesting dynamic. But can you? And you have people such as Bill Hammond from Texas Association of Business saying that public ed shouldn't get one more additional penny if there is any effort to weaken the accountability system. So how can you, on the flip side, put $2 billion toward vouchers that have no accountability whatsoever? So that's going to be one of those, one element of the conversation that I think is flummoxing people. In the end, if something does go forward, I think it'll probably be pretty targeted towards sort of special ed students, for instance, or I don't think it's going to be a blanket voucher program.
And Evan, Kate mentioning Bill Hammond and Texas Association of Business is a reminder of different groups that are forcing these lawmakers to own their vote from last time and to justify and to perhaps plan ahead on public education in particular and higher education.
Another instance in which what you would imagine to be the conservative or Republican side of things is not unified on every single issue. Right. Let me ask one or two more before we open it up, Dr. Murdoch, for questions. On health care, it did not go unnoticed. A couple weeks ago, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that we now have 5.8 million uninsured Texans. 23% of the state's population. The percentage of the population is down, but we retained our #1 ranking among the states in uninsured. At the same time, Dr. Murdoch and Professor Klein from the Hobby Center put out a report saying that if the state of Texas embraced aspects of federal health reform, we could conceivably insure 3 million of those 5.8 million by 2014. Now, there are many reasons you heard on Billy's panel last time why the state is not eager to embrace federal health reform, but the conversation about what we're going to do on this problem is out there. Mm-hmm. So can I ask you to talk about how that's likely to be a factor, the health care question and the uninsured question specifically, in the next session? Kate and then Joe.
I don't see Governor Perry and the Republicans changing their mind on whether to expand Medicaid, but I think it's going to be a very difficult decision for them in the end. I think it's going to be a brutal conversation.
If Governor Romney is elected, which we have to remind ourselves, despite what we're hearing on television every day, is still a real possibility. If Governor Romney is elected, then we assume that the Affordable Health Care Act is pulled back in part or in whole legislatively. But if President Obama is reelected and is willing to offer the governor more flexibility in the way that we heard a discussion of in the last panel. Do you think, Kate, that there's a possibility that Governor Perry would be willing to move a little bit in that direction?
No.
So his version of compromise will be you walk all the way over to my side of the line?
Yes. I think the Governor Perry would only be happy if the federal government block granted our Medicaid money.
Joe, you agree?
I agree, and those figures that you just named have not hurt the governor in the past, and I don't think they're going to particularly.
And in fact, in fairness to him, we've been first in that particular statistic going back
so, yeah, exactly.
many governors.
That's
I don't know that it's not a Perry problem. It's been a problem generally.
And this is one of those issues where the politics are going to have to play out in Washington and in Austin before anything is determined.
Right. Okay.
And that that may take a long time.
We're, again, committed to end at 11:45, which means we have 10 minutes. And that means we can take questions from all of you. And feel free to pepper our two willing journalists with, turn the tables on them, ask them questions. Sir.
Mr. Smith, I think you wrote about the reaction to the budget cuts and the litigation. Can you kind of summarize the lawsuits, plural, and handicap both timing and outcome?
I, as a general rule, don't demonstrate my shallowness of knowledge. What I can tell you is I believe, as the previous panel said, that whatever the outcome of those lawsuits is, it's likely not to affect this session. It's probably past this session. I can also tell you that there is a sense that there are some in the legislature who might have wanted to act differently on public ed, but politically they couldn't, and are secretly hoping that the courts put a gun to their heads and force them to do what they knew was right, but could not do politically. Now, there are just as many people who will say, no, 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 that's not true. There may be one or two people with weak knees, but there's no question that the outcome of the court fight over school finance, and I'll invite Joe and Kate into this conversation as well, is going to have an impact on what the mindset and the mood in the building is.
And that's what we heard this morning from the panel, and there's also ample precedent in this state for relying on the courts to make us do what we don't want to do.
David Thompson, who you'll hear from later, one of the attorneys in the litigation, told a story last year about while the legislature was debating the school finance bill that implemented the $4 billion in cuts, he received a note from a Republican on the House floor that said, "Please sue us." So,
I'll say it's nice to see Kent Grusendorf again. That's one positive byproduct of the cuts. Yes.
For you as reporters, when you write, who do you imagine your readership is?
That's a really good question, because it's always, and I'll let Kate answer for herself, of course, but it's always in the back of my head. It's sort of a person who would be interested in reading about politics in general, so they have a modicum of both interest and information, and yet I still feel an obligation to make it just as clear as I can, and I have to sort of understand it. Well, I have to understand it myself before I can communicate it. So it's a vague kind of sense that there's somebody out there who's interested in this issue, and I also have to make sure that as a writer, I don't indulge as best I have to think about not indulging in the sort of the bureaucratic speak or professional speak. It has to be clear English.
being with the Austin paper, I do have the benefit. I mean, our audience, a lot of them are connected to state government. And so I do have the benefit of being slightly wonkier, which is good for me.
And I don't. I mean, I don't think I do down here. We get, our stories about state government get a lot of response, and it's always interesting to sort of respond to the responders and get involved in a discussion or a debate. And usually we end up understanding each other a little better, I think.
Just a slight follow-up. Do you see yourself as trying to educate your audience as well as reporting?
I'm not sure that's the primary aim. I suppose that happens, but I don't think that's the primary aim.
I agree.
Let me take one or two more, and then we're gonna break. Yes, sir.
Time to time, we read about the Texas Department of Transportation fixing to run off a fiscal cliff.
Yes.
Nothing has been said in this conference about funding for our transportation system. Are we just going to continue to issue bonds let the future generations pay for?
We do a whole panel on that. You know, we know, Kate and Joe, the number I heard, which is at this point 2 years old, is that we have a $315 billion road funding hole to maintain current roads at the current level of congestion, and those last two conditions are immediately DOA the minute they come out of my mouth. So it's a huge number.
The report that just came out yesterday about the huge amount of money that we spend on keeping our cars running because
Yep.
we have to run on mediocre roads.
Yeah.
And I do believe that we are out of bonding capacity, so.
That's about as upbeat an answer as we can give you, I'm afraid. Let me take one more, and then we're going to have to end. The good Evan back there in the back row.
You all seem pretty confident in Strauss's reelection. So if we put the Democrats at like 55 votes in there, he's got to have 20 Republican votes. Does he have 20 very firm Republican votes?
I'm not sure. Do you know, Kate? I haven't gone down the list.
Actually, counting the House is not my job. So.
Mike is saying yes, I think, right?
And I'm sure that was a deeply unsatisfying response for you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm told the speaker is on the premises, and so out of deference to him and to your schedule and to the program, we're going to break now. Let you all go out for lunch. Please join me in thanking Kate, Alexander, and Joe Hawley for being here, and thank you all for being here as well.